It was the third Tuesday in a row that Arden Tate noticed the same man standing across the street from her flower shop, soaked in the morning drizzle, staring at nothing. She didn't know his name, only that he always wore the same black wool coat, his dark hair always a little windswept, and that there was something unbearably heavy in the way he carried himself, like the world had cracked open beneath him, and he hadn't yet decided whether to fall in or keep walking. That morning, something in her chest tugged when she saw him again. Without a second thought, she stepped outside, the bell above her flower shop door jingling faintly behind her. Her boots splashed through a shallow puddle as she crossed the street. He didn't move when she stopped in front of him. "Hi," she said softly, holding out a single pale pink rose. "I think you might need this more than I do." He looked at her, really looked. Eyes that had clearly seen too much locked with hers ocean blue and full of something unspoken. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "Did I?" "Do I know you?" "No," she said, offering a small, unsure smile. "But I've seen you here for weeks, and I just thought, sometimes flowers help, even if just a little." He stared at the rose in her hand like it was something sacred. After a beat, he took it. His fingers brushed hers, warm despite the cold. "Thank you," he said quietly. I haven't gotten flowers since the funeral." Arden's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," he nodded, eyes falling to the rose again. "She loved flowers, my sister. Especially pink ones. I'm sure she would have loved this one." He looked up again, his expression softening. "You work at the flower shop, I own it," she said, tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. Arden Tate." He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Orin Dempsey." There was a silence between them, not awkward, but heavy in a way that made it feel like they were both holding their breath. "Well," Arden said, stepping back, "if you ever want more flowers, or just a place to sit that smells better than the street, I'm usually around." She turned and walked back toward her shop, heart racing for reasons she didn't quite understand. Orin watched her go, the rose in his hand trembling slightly. By Thursday, he came into the flower shop. Arden was knee-deep in a bouquet for a wedding when the bell jingled and she glanced up, surprised to see him standing in the doorway, dripping from the rain. "You weren't lying," he said, eyes roaming the shop. "It really does smell better in here." She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "I try." He stood there awkwardly, holding something behind his back. "I brought you something," he said. Her brows lifted as he stepped forward and handed her a small, crumpled paper bag. Inside was a blueberry muffin. "I noticed you never leave the shop in the morning," he said. "Figured you might skip breakfast." She blinked, momentarily stunned. "That's really thoughtful." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I wanted to say thank you for the rose and for not pushing me to talk." "You don't owe me anything, Orin." He looked up. "I know. But I wanted to come in anyway." Arden motioned to the stool near the counter. "Sit, if you want." He hesitated. Then he did. Over the next few weeks, Orin came by almost every morning. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes he helped her unpack deliveries and arrange flowers, surprising her with how careful he was with delicate petals. He never offered details about his life, and she didn't press. But she saw the changes, how his eyes slowly lost that haunted look, how he started laughing again, how he brought her coffee when he noticed she was dragging. What she didn't know was that Orin Dempsey hadn't told her who he really was, that he owned the commercial building her shop was in, that he'd inherited a multi-million-dollar estate after his sister passed money he hadn't touched until recently, when he started anonymously covering the rent for small businesses on the block, especially hers. He didn't want her to look at him differently. Not Arden. She was quiet, kind, and had a way of making things feel like they weren't falling apart, even when they were, and he was falling for her. Fast, hard, he just didn't know how to tell her the truth. "You're staring at me again," Arden said one early evening, glancing over her shoulder as she arranged a display in the front window. Orin leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I wasn't staring, I was admiring." She narrowed her eyes at him. "That's worse." He grinned, then caught himself, the smile faltering slightly. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked suddenly. She froze, her hands stilling over the bouquet. "What, dinner like? Not here, a real dinner, you and me." Her lips parted slowly. "Why?" He blinked. "What do you mean, why? I mean, You're this mysterious guy who shows up out of nowhere, never really talks about himself, and now you want to take me to dinner." He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "Because I think about you when I'm not here, because I miss you when I don't see you for a day. Because you gave me a rose when I didn't know how to keep breathing, and now I don't want to go a day without hearing your voice." Her heart practically slammed against her ribs. "Oh," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "So, will you have dinner with me?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I will." When he picked her up Friday night, he wasn't in his usual black coat. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked expensive. And the car parked outside her shop wasn't just clean, it was a sleek black luxury sedan. She blinked at it, then at him. "You have a driver," he hesitated. "Yeah, it's just easier sometimes." She climbed in, unsure, her stomach a mix of nerves and something deeper. They drove into the city, past streets she rarely visited, until they pulled up to a restaurant with valet parking and glass doors taller than her apartment's ceiling. Arden turned to him as they stepped out. "This place looks fancy." He looked down at her, his hand brushing her lower back lightly. "It's just dinner." Inside, everything shimmered: gold fixtures, candles, polished floors. The maitre d' greeted Orin by name and led them to a private booth overlooking the skyline. Arden sat slowly, stunned. "You come here often?" she asked, half joking. He hesitated. "A few times." The waiter brought champagne. Orin ordered without even looking at the menu. She watched him, slowly realizing he wasn't just wealthy. He was used to this, and she wasn't. He must have noticed her silence because he reached across the table, gently touching her hand. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he said. "I didn't want it to change how you saw me." Her eyes searched his. "What are you saying? I'm not just some guy who needed a rose," he said quietly. "I own the building your shop is in, and a few others. I'm a millionaire. I didn't want to be, but after my sister..." He stopped, swallowing hard. Arden's hand tightened around his. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're the first person who's ever looked at me like I'm just me, not a name. Not a checkbook, just Orin." She stared at him, heart pounding, and somehow, despite everything, she smiled. "Well," she said softly, "I still like you, even if you're rich." His eyes widened slightly. Yeah. "But you're still paying for dinner." He laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks, and across the table, under golden candlelight, she realized she was falling for him too. "I didn't expect to be nervous," Arden said, letting her fingertips trail along the edge of a lacquered wooden box tucked beneath the table. "But I am." Orin leaned closer, his eyes unwavering. "Why?" "Because I've never had dinner in a place where the forks outnumber the courses." He chuckled softly, but didn't look away. "You handled it better than most people I know. I think I used a pastry fork for the salad. I think I liked that about you." The waiter brought a final glass of wine and slipped away without prompting. Arden lifted her glass, peering at the deep red swirl within. "So," she said carefully, "what else don't I know about you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the wooden box and pulled out a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a camellia bloom. He held it out, palm open, the metal gleaming beneath the soft light. "For you," he said simply. She stared at it, lips parting. "Why?" "Because no one's ever made me feel like I could start over until you." He fastened it around her neck without asking. His fingers brushed the back of her skin, and she felt the air catch in her lungs. When she looked up, his expression was careful, almost unreadable. "I thought you didn't want to change how I saw you," she said. "I don't," he said, "but I want you to see every part of me now." She let her fingers touch the pendant. "You're full of surprises. You don't know the half of it." He wasn't wrong. After the dinner, things shifted. He began showing up not only at the shop but outside of it. He picked her up after she closed, sometimes with no destination in mind. Once, he drove them out to a hilltop that overlooked the water, where they watched the city lights blink into life as the sun dipped behind the skyline. There, he told her about the house he grew up in. About the way his sister used to sneak out to pick wildflowers from the neighbor's yard, because she liked the ones that grew in chaos more than the ones sold in neat rows. Arden listened. Always. She never interrupted, never filled the space with her own stories unless he asked. And when he did, she told him about the little garden her grandmother kept in the back of the building they lived in. how she learned each plant's name like it was a spell, and how silence never felt lonely until her grandmother passed. One evening, he brought her to a rooftop that didn't belong to any restaurant or hotel. It was a private space, one with cushioned seating, a stone fire pit, and a view that made her breath catch in her throat. "Where are we?" she asked, stepping out of the elevator. He shrugged, hands in his pockets. "One of the places I stay when I need to breathe. You own it." He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked over to the edge of the rooftop and gestured for her to follow. When she did, she saw why. The entire city was laid out before them, glittering and alive. Beneath their feet, everything felt distant, small, manageable. He reached into a cooler tucked beside the seating area and pulled out 2 small glass bottles. "Ginger beer, right?" she laughed under her breath. "How do you remember everything?" "I pay attention when it matters." They sat beside each other, knees almost touching. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full but warm. She glanced sideways at him. "Why flowers?" He turned his head. "You could have gone anywhere. Done anything. Why did you keep showing up at my shop?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because it was the only place where I didn't feel like I was being watched, judged, asked for something," she softened. "People ask for a lot, every day, and usually not nicely. But you didn't ask for anything. You gave me something instead, without knowing who I was or what I could give back." She leaned back, eyes on the sky. "I didn't want anything. I know, that's why it mattered." She turned to him. "What does someone like you even do with all that money?" He looked thoughtful. "I try to fix things, quietly, without people knowing. I bought a community center that was about to shut down last year, funded a scholarship for kids who can't afford art school, covered a bakery's rent for 6 months when the owner's partner got sick." Her lips parted. "Why not tell people? Because then it becomes about me, not what they needed." She blinked at him, heart catching on something she hadn't expected. "That's rare." "I'm not trying to be rare," he said. "I'm trying to be better." They sat there until the night grew colder, until her fingers found his without thinking and stayed there. The next few days blurred into something neither of them named, but both understood. On a Thursday afternoon, Arden was elbow-deep in a cascade arrangement for a last-minute wedding order when Orin walked in with a small white box. "Before you say anything," he said, setting it on the counter, "I know you hate surprises." "I don't hate surprises," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I hate expectations." "No expectations," he said. "Just a gift." Inside was a pair of gloves, delicate, floral stitched leather in a soft burgundy hue. She blinked. "These are beautiful." "Your hands are always cold," he said. "And I noticed you never wear gloves even when it's freezing." She swallowed, the gesture small but sharp. "You remember everything." "I remember you." Before she could say anything else, the door chimed again. A woman stepped inside, elegant, tall, with sharp cheekbones and a coat that probably cost more than Arden's monthly rent. She looked around with distant curiosity before her eyes landed on Orin. "There you are," she said, stepping forward. "I've been trying to reach you." Orin's entire body shifted. "Still, guarded, Celeste," he said. "This isn't a good time." She arched a brow, glancing between him and Arden. "Clearly." Arden took a step back, the air in the room suddenly thick. "I didn't realize you were entertaining," Celeste said coolly. "I just wanted to go over the foundation gala next week. Your name's all over the press materials. It would be awkward if you didn't show." "I'm not going," he said. "Orin," she said, her voice hardening, "you can't just disappear because something hurts. You have obligations." "I said I'm not going." Celeste's gaze flicked to Arden again. "Fine, clearly you've found other interests." She turned and walked out without another word. Arden stood still, the gloves still in her hands. "Who was that?" "My cousin," he said after a moment. "We run the family trust together. She doesn't seem thrilled with your life choices. She's not used to being told no." Arden set the gloves down gently. "Does she speak for the rest of your world?" He looked at her sharply. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if this, whatever this is, exists outside my shop." His jaw flexed. "Yes, it does. I'm not a gala kind of girl, Orin. I don't know how to be someone else. I don't want someone else." She looked at him, quiet for a beat. "Then prove it." He stepped closer. "How? Bring me into your world just once. Let me see it." He hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow night, there's a charity auction. It's black tie." If you come, I'll introduce you to everyone. Her stomach flipped. I don't own anything remotely black tie. I already called a stylist. She'll meet you at your apartment in an hour. She stared at him. You did what? I said. I pay attention. She shook her head, laughing despite the knot in her throat. You're impossible, and you're going to be unforgettable. Arden stood in front of the gilded mirror, her breath catching as the final earring was fastened behind her left ear. The dress clung like poured silk, its midnight hue deepening the amber of her eyes. Her hair had been swept into a low twist at the nape of her neck, soft tendrils deliberately left loose to frame her face. She barely recognized her own reflection. The stylist Marla, a woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper eye, stepped back, examining her handiwork with professional satisfaction. You'll turn heads, she said, adjusting the neckline slightly. But more importantly, you'll hold them. I'm not trying to hold anything, Arden replied, fidgeting with the delicate clasp of the clutch bag Marla had insisted she carry. I'm just showing up. And that, Marla said, is exactly why you'll make an impression. The car waiting for her was different from the one Orin usually arrived in. Longer, sleeker. A uniformed driver opened the door without a word. Arden slid into the back seat, heart hammering in her chest like it was trying to keep pace with the city itself. When she arrived, the building loomed like something out of a dream, glass and gold and light, chandeliers the size of bedrooms glittering overhead. Guests ascended the marble steps in gowns and tuxedos, laughter echoing beneath the arches. Orin was waiting for her just inside the entrance, dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. He didn't smile when he saw her. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said more than any words could. You're here, he said, offering his hand. I said I would be. You look. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to find the right word. Unreal. She took his hand. Don't get used to it. I could. They walked together through the cavernous hall, past walls lined with art and cases of rare jewelry up for auction. Conversations floated all around them, names she didn't recognize, references to foundations, endowments, and political dinners. She kept her chin lifted and her steps steady. Orin introduced her to people with effortless poise. Each time he said only, "This is Arden," as if that alone explained everything, and somehow it was enough. They reached a lounge tucked behind the main hall, where several men stood in conversation. One of them turned as they approached a man with silver-streaked hair and a voice that implied command without needing volume. "Orin," he said, extending a hand. "Good to see you." "I didn't think you were attending." "I changed my mind," Orin replied. "Arden, this is Orin Dempsey, my father." Arden froze for half a second, then she extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said. Conrad's eyes flicked down to her hand, then back to her face. "Likewise." There was something in his tone that wasn't quite dismissive, but not welcoming either, as if he were still deciding how much space she was allowed to take up in the room. "I didn't know you were seeing anyone," Conrad said to Orin, his voice low but not private. "I wasn't," Orin replied. "Until I was." Conrad studied him, then Arden again. "You've always had a tendency to disappear when things get difficult. I'm glad to see you finally found something or someone worth staying for." Orin's jaw shifted slightly. "She's not a thing, and I didn't just find her, I noticed her." Conrad gave a small nod, then moved on to speak with another couple. Arden let out a slow breath. "You okay?" Orin asked, watching her closely. "You didn't warn me about your father." "I didn't think it would help." They stepped back into the main room as the auction began. Items were announced in elegant tones, the bidding fast and effortless. A rare watch, a private vineyard, a sculpture carved from a single piece of jade. Arden watched as numbers were tossed around like they meant nothing. 50,000, 75, 120. The crowd didn't flinch. Champagne was sipped between bids. Orin leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "There's a garden estate up next. My sister loved it." She used to call it her escape. "Are you going to bid?" He hesitated. "I wasn't, but I might." The auctioneer called the opening bid. Orin raised his card. Arden watched as the numbers climbed. The final bid landed at 360,000. Orin didn't blink as the gavel fell. The applause was polite. Arden turned to him, eyebrows lifted. "Just like that, she asked. I wasn't going to let it fall into someone else's hands, he said. It's part of her memory. You bought it because of her, he looked at her, his voice softer. And maybe because of you. After the auction, they stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. The cool air wrapped around them, but Orin didn't seem to notice. His gaze was fixed on the skyline. I used to think all of this meant something, he said. The money, the power, the legacy. But standing here with you, I'm starting to think none of it matters unless I have someone who sees more than what I own. She turned toward him. Do you really think you can keep both worlds? I don't want both, he said. I want mine to look more like yours. She laughed under her breath. Mine's small, messy, real. Exactly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny velvet box. Arden's breath hitched. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet, she blinked. Then what is this? He opened it. Inside was a silver key on a slender chain. It's the garden estate, he said. It's not just an escape anymore. I want it to be something we build together, a place that's ours. She stared at the key. You don't even know if I'll say yes. I don't need to know, I just needed to ask. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid the chain into her hand, watching it catch the light. If I say yes, she said slowly, it's not because of the house, or the dresses, or the auctions, I know. It's because I believe you're not running anymore. He looked at her then, really looked, the weight of everything he hadn't said etched into his expression. I stopped running the moment you gave me that rose. She stepped closer, slipping the chain around her neck beside the camellia pendant. The two charms touched in the center of her collarbone. Then I guess I'm staying too. He pulled her against him, his hand resting lightly against the small of her back. The city hummed below them, but neither of them heard it. For the first time since they met, there was nothing between them but truth, and it was enough. The first time Orin brought Arden to the estate, the sky was overcast, the kind of muted silver that made the world feel like it had paused to exhale. The long, winding drive was lined with elms, their branches still bare from winter but brimming with quiet promise. The house came into view slowly, stone and glass wrapped in ivy, perched at the edge of a hill that overlooked a stretch of forest and lake beyond. He parked near the front and didn't move, hands resting on the steering wheel. You're nervous, Arden said, her fingers curled around the hem of her coat. He glanced at her. Only because I want you to see it as more than just property. She reached across, touching his wrist. I don't care about the walls, just what lives inside them. They stepped out into the stillness. The wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Arden tilted her head, listening. There's birdsong, she whispered. He smiled faintly. They always come back early here. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and old paper. Dust motes floated through the air, catching light through the high windows. She wandered ahead of him without hesitation, her gaze sweeping across the exposed beams and cracked leather armchairs, the fireplace still dark with ash from the last time it had been used. Has anyone been here since she? No, he said. Not since the memorial. She paused in front of a shelf lined with books, some worn, spines split, others pristine. Her hand hovered over a title, then drew back. What kind of place do you want this to become? She asked. He leaned against the doorframe. Somewhere that feels lived in again, a place for growing things. She turned, her eyes meeting his. Then let's start. They spent the day dusting off furniture, opening windows, airing out the rooms. Orin unboxed a set of mismatched dishes from a storage closet, while Arden found a stack of linen napkins with hand-stitched initials in the corner. They worked without music, without distraction, the silence between them easy. When the sun dipped behind the trees, they sat on the back terrace with mugs of tea and a blanket across their laps. A deer stepped into the clearing and paused, head raised, before darting back into the woods. Do you think she'd be okay with this? Arden asked. I think she would have liked you more than she liked me. That's not hard to imagine, she teased, nudging his knee with hers. He turned to her, the lines in his face softer now. I've been thinking about something. She waited. I want to give up my seat on the board, her brow lifted. The trust, he nodded. Celeste can handle it. She already does most of the work. I don't want to spend the rest of my life managing things I no longer believe in, her voice lowered. What would you do instead? This, he said. With you, the estate, the shop, maybe something new. Something we build from the ground up. "You're sure?" For the first time in years, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I'll help you pack up your office." The following weeks unfolded like fragments of a different life: early mornings at the estate, turning soil and planting bulbs. Late afternoons at the shop, arranging new displays, with Orin sweeping the floor or hauling crates like he'd done it all his life. He adapted quickly, never dismissing a task as beneath him. When she taught him how to trim stems at an angle, he paid attention. When she explained the difference between ranunculus and peonies, he memorized it. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked one evening as they locked up the shop, the city quiet around them. "Miss what?" "The meetings, the suits, the driver waiting outside." He tilted his head. "I thought I'd miss the control, but it turns out I never had any to begin with." "Not really." They walked home together, hands brushing, the streets still damp from an earlier rain. Outside her apartment, he paused. "I've been staying at the estate," he said, "but I don't want to keep going back there alone." Arden's heartbeat slowed. "Are you asking me to move in?" "I'm asking you to come home with me." She stepped closer. "What if we get it wrong?" He didn't blink. "Then we fix it. Together." She unlocked her door slowly, then turned and slipped her fingers into his. "Give me 30 minutes. That night they slept in the same bed for the first time. No rush, no urgency, just skin against skin, breath aligned, arms around each other like they'd always belonged. Mornings became ritual. She brewed coffee while he read the news aloud in mock-serious tones. They took turns cooking breakfast, Arden burning toast, Orin somehow mastering frittatas without ever measuring a thing. They hung wind chimes on the back porch and planted climbing roses along the fence. He built her a table for the greenhouse. She painted a mural inside the pantry. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed in formal script, an invitation to an awards ceremony honoring Orin's philanthropic work with small businesses. He turned it over in his hands, unreadable. "You're not going?" she asked. "I don't need a plaque, but they're acknowledging what you've done." "I didn't do it for that. You should still go." He set the envelope down. "Only if you sit beside me." The event was smaller than the auction, but no less polished. People greeted Orin with admiration now, not expectation. He introduced Arden with the same ease as before, but this time there was no hesitation. Only pride. During the ceremony, a speaker recounted the number of businesses he'd supported, the scholarships he'd funded, the lives his quiet generosity had touched. Arden watched him from the side of the stage, her chest tight with something unnameable. When he accepted the award, he said few words. "I used to think wealth was the most powerful thing I owned, but it turns out it was my time. And I've learned that giving it to the right people matters more than anything else." Afterward, Arden found him outside beneath the string lights, the night cool and clear. "You're good at this," she said. "I'm good because you taught me how to be." She stepped into his arms without thinking, resting her cheek against his chest. "I want to show you something." They drove out to the estate that night, headlights cutting through the darkness. In the back garden, Arden led him to a small clearing they'd planted weeks before. The blooms had started to open: lavender, marigold, cosmos, all wild and imperfect and alive. She handed him a small envelope. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph of them, taken by a customer at the shop weeks ago. He was holding a bouquet. She was laughing on the back. She'd written one sentence in her tidy script: "Not everything beautiful needs to be perfect." He looked up, something breaking open in his eyes. "I have something for you too," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out another box. This time it was smaller than the one with the key. He opened it slowly, the ring inside simple, a gold band with a single pale pink stone. "You gave me a rose when I had nothing," he said. "And now I have everything. Because of you. Will you marry me?" Arden, her throat tightened. "Yes," she said, barely able to breathe. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They stood in the garden, surrounded by the flowers they'd planted, the stars overhead watching quietly. And in that moment, nothing else existed, only them. A florist who gave a rose to a grieving man, and a millionaire who found his way back to life through her love. The wedding was planned in less than 6 weeks, and Arden had no interest in drawn-out traditions or seating charts arranged with military precision. She didn't want 10 bridesmaids in matching chiffon or a cake taller than her. What she wanted was a ceremony that felt like them, quiet in its intimacy, loud in its heart, full of color and warmth and imperfection. Orin offered her anything. A villa in Italy, a private island, a cathedral in Paris. She turned them all down with a kiss to his cheek and a shake of her head. "There's an orchard behind the estate," she said one morning as they stood barefoot in the kitchen, sunlight filtering through the windows. "It's overgrown and wild, but the trees still bloom." He set down his coffee. "Then we'll get married there. Are you sure?" "It's not exactly a 5-star destination." "I don't need 5 stars," he said. "I just need you." They cleared the orchard themselves with thick gloves and pruning shears, their hands scratched and stained by bark and blossoms. Orin refused to hire a landscaping crew. He insisted on doing it, with her every branch trimmed, every weed pulled, every stone path swept clean by their hands alone. By the time the apple trees began to flower in soft bursts of white and blush, the space had transformed, not into something perfect, but into something real. Arden planted rows of wildflowers between the tree trunks. Orin built benches from reclaimed wood and strung lanterns between the branches. The afternoon before the wedding, she caught him standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a small photograph. She walked up beside him and leaned in. "Is that her?" she asked. He nodded. "She would have loved this." "Then she'll be here," she whispered, "in every petal, every breeze." He didn't answer, but he slid the photo into the lining of his suit jacket. The morning of the wedding was cool and golden, the sky streaked with pale lavender clouds. Arden dressed alone in the greenhouse, surrounded by the scent of fresh herbs and soil. Her dress was simple, soft ivory silk with a row of tiny buttons down the back, the sleeves sheer and embroidered with tiny camellias. She wore no veil, no crown, just the pendant Orin had given her resting above her heart. Marla arrived to help with her hair, for once saying nothing about high fashion or symmetry. "You already look like yourself," she said, gently threading tiny white blossoms into Arden's braid. "That's more beautiful than anything I could create." The guests were few, a handful of close friends, some from the block where her flower shop stood, others from Orin's quieter philanthropic circles. No press, no spectacle. Just folding chairs beneath the trees and linen runners draped across long wooden tables waiting for supper. Orin waited at the end of the aisle, his suit a deep gray, his tie forest green. His hands were clasped in front of him, but his eyes were fixed on her with such fierce tenderness she felt her breath catch. As she stepped between the rows of trees, Arden felt the hush of the orchard wrap around her. The wind stirred the petals above, sending gentle confetti drifting through the air. She could smell rosemary and honeysuckle. She could hear the hush of held breath. And she could feel him every step drawing her closer to the man who had once stood alone in the rain with grief in his eyes, and now waited with love written across his entire being. When she reached him, Orin didn't take her hand right away. Instead, he leaned in, his voice low and warm. "You've changed me, Arden Tate," he said. "And I hope I never change back." She smiled, her voice steady. "You didn't change, you just came home." The officiant stood beneath the largest tree, his words brief but heartfelt, no overly long speeches, no unnecessary vows. Just promises made in clear voices, eyes locked, hands threaded. "I promise," Arden said, "to always leave room for your silences, to plant joy with you even when things won't bloom. And to love you not as the world sees you, but as you are when no one's watching." Orin took a breath, his fingers tightening around hers. "I promise to protect the peace we've built, to never make you feel small. And to love you in every season, even when the flowers fade." When he slipped the ring on her finger, it wasn't just a gesture. It was the tying of everything: grief, hope, healing, belonging into a single moment that wrapped around them like a promise fulfilled. They kissed beneath the apple blossoms, and the guests erupted into cheers. The reception was held right there in the orchard, long tables laid with mismatched china and wild arrangements Arden had made herself that morning. There was no caterer. Instead, they'd brought in a small family-owned restaurant from the neighborhood that served fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and lamb marinated in herbs from Arden's own garden. Laughter filled the air. Children danced between trees. Someone played a violin. And as the sun dipped low, Orin pulled Arden into a slow dance on the grass, their feet bare, her head resting against his chest. "You still sure this is what you want?" she murmured. He kissed the top of her head. "More sure than I've ever been of anything." Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered low, they sat on the back steps of the house, her head against his shoulder, the stars thick above them. "Do you think it'll always feel like this?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, "but I think we'll always find our way back to it." She turned to look at him. "You're not afraid anymore." "I was never afraid of loving you," he said, "only of not being enough." "You were always enough," she whispered. They went inside together, the door closing behind them not with finality, but with the quiet certainty that whatever came next, it would be theirs. Years later, the estate had changed. The greenhouse had doubled in size. A new section had been added to the orchard, filled with fruit trees from different corners of the world. Arden's flower shop had expanded to 2 locations, and Orin had started a foundation for young entrepreneurs who didn't come from money or connections, just ideas and grit. He never rejoined the board, never returned to the life he left behind. They lived in a rhythm of planted roots and soft mornings, of shared burdens and long dinners beneath the stars. They had arguments, laughter, silence, and music. They adopted a dog that never stopped shedding and a cat that refused to acknowledge Orin altogether. They built a life not of extravagance, but of intention. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she gave him a rose, he brought her one in return, never in a bouquet, never wrapped in ribbon. Just one, always pink, always fresh, and always placed beside her coffee cup with a note that never changed: "Thank you for saving me." They didn't need grand declarations anymore. They didn't need reminders of who he used to be or how far they'd come. They only needed each other, and the quiet, steady truth that love, when planted in the right soil, could grow into something unstoppable.